The morning Willa Kerrigan buried her husband beneath the red Missouri clay. Rain fell so hard, it turned the cemetery into a sea of mud, and she thought maybe God was trying to wash away what she had done. She stood at the graveside in her black dress, water streaming down her face mixing with tears, and did not correct the preacher when he spoke of tragic accidents and God's mysterious ways. Nobody in St. Louis knew the truth, and she intended to keep it that way even as guilt carved itself into her bones like initials on a tree, permanent and deep. 3 years passed, and Willa remained in the small house on the edge of town where she had lived with Thomas. She kept to herself mostly, running the general store her husband had left her, serving customers with efficient politeness, but never warmth. The townspeople called her the Widow Kerrigan and spoke in hushed tones about how grief had hardened her, made her cold. They did not know that every night she lay awake seeing Thomas's face in those final moments, hearing the sound of the horse's hooves, reliving the choice she had made in a single breath that changed everything. The store provided enough to live on, barely. Willa rose before dawn each day, swept the wooden floors, arranged the goods on shelves worn smooth by years of use. She ordered supplies from traveling merchants, kept meticulous records in a ledger that never balanced quite right because her hands shook when she tried to focus on the numbers. The shaking had started the day Thomas died and never stopped. It was a Tuesday in September of 1881 when Kade Vickers walked into her store, trail dust on his clothes and exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. He was tall, probably 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw rough with several days of stubble. He moved with the easy grace of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot, and when he took off his hat, Willa noticed his hands, strong and calloused and steady. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice carrying the soft drawl of someone raised further south. "Looking for supplies. Got a list here if you do not mind helping me fill it." Willa took the paper he offered without meeting his eyes. She had learned not to look at people directly because they asked questions when she did, wanted to know why she always seemed so sad, why she never smiled. The list was standard: flour and coffee and beans, ammunition for a Winchester rifle, tobacco, salt pork. Passing through. She asked, moving between the shelves with practiced efficiency. "Was planning to," Kade said, leaning against the counter. "But I heard old man Fletcher is looking for help on his ranch. Thought I might stay the winter if the work is good." She nodded, not caring one way or another. The Fletcher Ranch was 5 miles outside town, a sprawling operation that always needed extra hands. She gathered the items on his list, wrapped them in brown paper, tied everything with string. Her fingers fumbled with the knots and she had to start over twice. "You all right there?" Kade asked, and something in his tone made her look up. He was watching her with genuine concern, not the morbid curiosity most people showed, not the pity that made her want to scream. "Fine," she said shortly. "That will be $4.60. He paid in coins counted out carefully on the scarred wooden counter. When his hand brushed hers accidentally as he took the packages, Willa jerked back as if burned. She saw something flicker in his eyes, understanding maybe or recognition of pain. He did not comment on it. "Thank you, madam. I expect I will be seeing you again if I take the job at Fletcher's place." After he left, Willa found herself thinking about him at odd moments through the day. About his hands that did not shake, about the way he had looked at her like she was a person rather than a ghost haunting her own life. She pushed the thoughts away. She had no business thinking about any man, not after what she had done to Thomas. That night the dreams came worse than usual. In them she was back in the barn 3 years ago, watching Thomas saddle the black gelding, the horse that was too spirited, too mean. She had known he should not ride it. Thomas had been drinking, was angry about money they did not have, about the store failing, about everything wrong in their marriage. He yanked at the saddle cinch, and the horse rolled its eyes white with fear. "Do not take him," Dream Willa said, just as real Willa had said. "He is not safe when you have been drinking." "Mind your own business," Thomas snarled. "I can ride any damned horse I please." In the dream as in life, Willa watched him mount, watched the horse sidestep nervously. She could have grabbed the reins, could have insisted, could have physically stopped him even though it would have meant another fight, another night of his anger. Instead, she stepped back, let him go, made a choice through inaction. The horse had thrown him within minutes. Thomas landed wrong, head striking the fence post with a sound Willa still heard in every quiet moment. By the time she reached him, his eyes were empty. She woke gasping, sweat soaking through her nightgown despite the cool September air. 3 years and the guilt never lessened. She had let him ride knowing it was dangerous, had wanted just for a moment for him to be gone. And then he was, and she could never take back that moment of dark wishing. Willa went to the kitchen, lit a lamp, sat at the table with her head in her hands. The house creaked around her, full of Thomas's absence. His coat still hung by the door. His pipe rested on the mantel. She could not bring herself to move these things or to keep them close, so they existed in a strange limbo, gathering dust. Kade did take the job at the Fletcher Ranch, and he came into town every Saturday for supplies. He always stopped at Willa's store, always polite, always patient when her hands shook tying up his packages. He did not try to make conversation beyond what was necessary, seemed to understand she preferred silence. But he had a way of being present that made the store feel less empty, less like a tomb where Willa was slowly dying. October brought cold rain and early frost. The store needed repairs, shingles that leaked and windows that no longer closed properly. Willa tried to fix them herself, unwilling to spend money on labor, but the roof was too high and the windows too warped. She was struggling with a stubborn pane of glass one Saturday morning when Kade arrived. "That frame is swollen from moisture," he said, setting down his packages. "You need to plane the edges." "I do not have the tools," Willa admitted reluctantly. "I do. Be happy to help if you want." She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the careful distance she kept from everyone. But the window would not close and winter was coming, and pride seemed foolish in the face of freezing through the cold months. "All right," she said. "Thank you." He brought tools from his saddlebag, worked with quick competence while Willa tried to focus on her ledgers and failed completely. She found herself watching his hands, the sure movements, the way he tested each adjustment until the window slid smoothly in its frame. When he finished, he checked the others without being asked, fixed 2 more that stuck. "The roof needs attention too," he said, looking up at the water-stained ceiling. "Some of those shingles are about to blow off. I know. I will get to it." "With respect, madam, you cannot get to a roof like that alone. Let me help. Fletcher does not need me on Sundays. I cannot pay you." "Did not ask you to." His eyes were steady, kind. "Sometimes people just help because it is the right thing." Willa's throat tightened. She could not remember the last time someone had offered help without wanting something in return. Thomas had always kept strict accounts, measuring everything she did against what he provided, finding her wanting. "Why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Kade was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because you look like you are carrying the whole world on your shoulders, and maybe you do not have to do it alone." She turned away before he could see the tears. "Sunday, then, if you are sure." He came that Sunday with borrowed ladders and tools and worked through the afternoon replacing shingles and sealing leaks. Willa made coffee, brought it up to him, held the ladder steady. They did not talk much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than oppressive. When the work was finished, she invited him to stay for supper without quite meaning to, the words emerging unbidden. They ate stew and bread at her small kitchen table. Kade had an easy manner, talked about the ranch and the cattle and the other hands without seeming to expect much response. Willa found herself relaxing fractionally, the permanent knot in her shoulders loosening just slightly. "How long were you married?" he asked as she poured more coffee. The question hit like a fist. 3 years. He died 3 years ago. I am sorry. That must have been hard. Yes. The word came out flat. She could not explain that the hard part was not losing Thomas but how she had lost him, the guilt that ate at her insides like acid. "I lost someone too," Kade said quietly. "My brother. 5 years back. We were driving cattle and he got thrown, trampled in the stampede. I was right there, could have pulled him clear maybe, but I froze. Just sat on my horse and watched it happen." Willa's head snapped up, meeting his eyes for the first time with full attention. "That was not your fault. In a stampede there is no time to think. I tell myself that. But I still see it, still wonder if I could have done something different." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "Guilt is a heavy thing to carry, wears you down after a while." She stared at him, this man who somehow understood the weight she carried. "How do you bear it?" "Some days better than others. I found it helps to do things that matter, help people when I can, try to make the world a little better than I found it." He paused. "And I had to forgive myself. That is the hardest part." "I do not think I can do that," Willa whispered. "Maybe not today. But someday." His voice was gentle. "You deserve to put it down, whatever you are carrying." They sat in silence as dusk gathered outside. When Kade finally left, he thanked her for supper and said he would check on the roof after the next rain, make sure the repairs held. Willa watched him ride away and felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Kade came to town every Saturday for supplies, stayed longer each time helping with small repairs and tasks around the store. Willa began to look forward to these visits, began to care about her appearance again, brushing her dark hair until it shone and wearing the blue dress that brought out her eyes. She was 28 years old but felt ancient, worn down by grief and guilt. Kade made her remember what it felt like to be young. They talked more as comfort grew between them. Kade had been born in Arkansas, left home at 16 to work ranches across the West. He had a slow smile that transformed his serious face, and a thoughtful way of listening that made Willa feel heard. She told him about running the store, about the difficulties of managing alone, about small memories from childhood before her marriage. She did not tell him about Thomas. About the drinking and the anger, the way her husband had slowly poisoned their life together with resentment and blame. About how she had stopped loving him long before he died, had sometimes wished to be free even as the thought shamed her. Kade seemed to sense there were things she could not speak of yet, and he did not push. November brought the first snow, heavy and wet. Willa woke to find the store's front steps buried, the street outside transformed into white silence. She was shoveling a path when Kade arrived on horseback, leading a second mount. "Thought you might need help," he called, swinging down from the saddle. Together they cleared the steps and the walk in front of the store. The work was hard but satisfying, and when they finished, Willa's cheeks were flushed with cold and exertion. She felt alive in a way she had not for years. "Come inside," she said. "Warm up before you ride back." In the store's back room, where she kept a small stove, they shed their coats and stood close to the heat. Kade's hair was wet with melted snow, his eyes bright. Willa suddenly became aware of how near he stood, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way he was looking at her. "Willa," he said, using her first name for the first time. I need to tell you something, her heart hammered. What? I care about you. More than I probably should, given that we have not known each other long. But you are on my mind all the time, when I am working, when I am trying to sleep. I look for excuses to come to town just to see you. She could not breathe. Kade, you do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Whatever happened in your past, whatever you think you have done, it does not change how I see you. You are a good woman, Willa. Kind and strong and deserving of happiness. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You do not know what I did. Then tell me. The words came like pulling arrows from a wound, painful and necessary. She told him everything. About Thomas and his drinking, the fights, the slow erosion of their marriage. About that day in the barn, watching him mount the dangerous horse, making the choice to step back instead of stopping him. I let him go, she said, voice breaking. Part of me wanted him to get hurt, just enough to scare him, make him stop drinking maybe. I did not want him to die, but I wanted something to change, and I was so tired of fighting, so I did nothing, and he died because I did nothing. Kade listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he took her hands in his, held them steady. Willa, listen to me. What happened to Thomas was an accident. You could not have known he would be killed. And even if you had stopped him that day, he would have ridden that horse another time or done something else dangerous. You cannot control another person's choices. But I wanted to be free of him. That makes me responsible. No, it makes you human. Being in a marriage that makes you unhappy is not a crime. Having dark thoughts does not make you a murderer. You did not cause his death. How can you say that? You were not there. I do not need to have been there. I know you, Willa. I see who you are. You punish yourself over every little thing, apologize for taking up space in the world. That tells me you are someone with a conscience, someone who cares deeply. If you were truly responsible for Thomas's death, if you had actually wanted it and caused it, you would not be torn apart by guilt. His words struck something deep inside her, a possibility she had never considered. What if she was not responsible? What if the guilt she had carried for 3 years was based on a lie she had told herself? I do not know how to let it go, she whispered. Start by forgiving yourself for being human, for having been unhappy in your marriage, for not being perfect. He squeezed her hands. Start by believing you deserve another chance at life. Willa looked into his eyes and saw only compassion, no judgment. Something broke open inside her, a dam that had held back years of tears. She sobbed against his chest while he held her, stroking her hair, murmuring that it was all right, that she was going to be all right. When the storm of weeping finally passed, she felt lighter than she had in years. Emptied out but clean, like a wound that had finally been drained of poison. Thank you, she said, pulling back slightly. For what? For seeing me. For not turning away. Kade cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the last tears. I could never turn away from you. He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, giving her space to refuse. But Willa did not refuse. She leaned into him, into the warmth and strength and kindness he offered, and kissed him back. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been, hard and demanding and always wanting more than she could give. This was soft and sweet, a conversation rather than a conquest. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Kade rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you properly, he said. If you will let me, people will talk. It has only been 3 years since Thomas died. Let them talk. I do not care what anyone else thinks. Do you want this, Willa? Do you want to see where this could go between us? Did she? The old Willa, the one buried under guilt and grief, would have said no, would have believed she did not deserve happiness. But something had shifted today. Kade had helped her see her past differently, had offered her a way out of the prison she had built. Yes, she said. I want this. His smile was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. They courted through the winter, and it was the happiest time Willa could remember. Kade came to town twice a week, helped with the store, took her on walks when the weather permitted. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building the kind of deep friendship that was the foundation of lasting love. Willa found herself laughing again, something she had thought lost forever. Kade had a dry sense of humor and a gift for finding joy in small things. He brought her wildflowers pressed between the pages of books, taught her to play cards, read to her by lamplight when evening came too soon. The townspeople did gossip, as she had known they would. She heard the whispers in church, saw the disapproving looks from the older women. But she also saw something else, approval from the younger folks who thought 3 years of mourning was more than enough. Mrs. Fletcher, the rancher's wife, stopped by the store one day and took Willa's hand. "I am glad to see you smiling again," she said. "Kade is a good man. Do not let the old hens make you feel bad for choosing happiness." Christmas came and Kade carved Willa a wooden box for her treasures, lined it with felt and polished it until the wood glowed. She gave him a warm scarf she had knitted, her fingers clumsy at first with the unfamiliar work, but growing more confident. They attended the church service together, and afterward Kade asked formally if he might speak to her about something important. They went back to her house, to the kitchen where they had shared so many meals and conversations. Kade seemed nervous for the first time since she had known him, running his hands through his hair, pacing. "Just say it," Willa said gently. "Marry me." The words came out in a rush. "I know it is fast and people will have opinions, but I love you, Willa. I want to spend my life with you. I want to help you run the store, build a family, grow old together. I know you have been hurt and you have fears, but I will spend every day proving that you can trust me. Will you marry me?" Willa's heart felt too big for her chest. A year ago, she would have said such happiness was impossible for her. But Kade had helped her set down the guilt that had crippled her, had shown her that her past did not have to define her future. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face again, but these were tears of joy. "Yes, I will marry you." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Willa felt desire stir for the first time in years. Not the dutiful response she had given Thomas, but something real and warm, her body coming alive under Kade's hands. They married in February of 1882, a simple ceremony in the church with the whole town watching. Willa wore a cream-colored dress and carried winter roses, her hand steady in Kade's as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The wedding night was a revelation. Kade was patient and gentle, taking time to learn what she liked, making sure she found pleasure before seeking his own. Willa had thought she understood what happened between a man and a woman, but Thomas had never cared for anything beyond his own satisfaction. This was different, a true joining of bodies and hearts, and she wept afterward from the beauty of it. "Did I hurt you?" Kade asked, immediately concerned. "No, it is just, I did not know it could be like this, that I could feel this way." He held her close, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "This is how it should always be, two people loving each other, taking care of each other." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Kade moved into Willa's house, brought his few belongings, helped her finally clear away Thomas's things. They donated the clothes and personal items to the church, and Willa felt no guilt in doing so. That chapter of her life was closed. Kade took over the heavy work in the store, moving stock and making deliveries while Willa handled the accounts and customer service. Together, they made a good team, and the business began to prosper as it never had under Thomas's indifferent management. Kade had ideas for expansion, bringing in new goods and offering fair credit to farmers who were short before harvest. Spring brought new life to St. Louis. The trees budded and flowered, the river ran high and fast with snowmelt, and Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Kade over breakfast one morning, watched his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he said, reverent. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He came around the table, knelt beside her chair, placed his hand on her still flat belly. "I love you so much, both of you." The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick for the first few months, unable to keep much food down, exhausted all the time. Kade took over most of her duties in the store, brought her crackers and ginger tea, held her hair when she was ill. He never complained, never made her feel like a burden. As her belly grew, Willa sometimes felt the old fears creeping back. What if she was a terrible mother? What if something went wrong? What if she did not deserve this happiness? But Kade was always there, steady as stone, reminding her that fear was normal and she was going to be fine. "You are not the same person you were when Thomas died," he told her one night as they lay in bed, his hand on her swollen stomach feeling the baby kick. "You have grown, changed, healed. You are going to be an amazing mother. How do you know? Because you care so much. Because you think about things, worry about doing right. That is exactly what a child needs." Their son was born in November of 1882 during the first snowstorm of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Willa thought she might die. But Kade stayed with her the entire time despite the midwife's protests that men had no place in birthing rooms, and his presence gave her strength. When the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Willa felt something settle in her soul. This was what life was supposed to be. Not the fear and anger of her first marriage, but this, love and partnership and new life. "What should we name him?" Kade asked, holding his son with careful wonder. "What about James? After your brother?" Kade's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. He should know about the uncle he never met, the good man his father loved." They named the baby James Kade Vickers, and he became the center of their world. Kade was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings, walking the floor when James was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Willa had never seen a man so involved with an infant, but Kade said he wanted to share every moment, every milestone. The store continued to thrive. They hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the counter work, so Willa could focus on the baby, and the extra hands allowed them to expand their inventory. By the time James was a year old, they were doing well enough to consider buying the building instead of renting it. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. James grew into a happy toddler, full of energy and curiosity. Willa and Kade talked about having more children, but she wanted to wait until James was a bit older. They had time, they were young still, and she wanted to savor each stage. One evening in spring when James was 2 years old, Willa and Kade sat on the porch watching the sunset while their son played in the yard. It was peaceful and perfect, the kind of ordinary happiness Willa had never imagined for herself. "You ever think about the past?" Kade asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes, but it does not hurt the way it used to. You have come so far, I am proud of you." She leaned into him. "I could not have done it without you. You helped me see that I was not the monster I thought I was. You were never a monster. Just a woman in pain who needed to forgive herself." Willa thought about that day in her store when Kade had listened to her confession without judgment, had helped her understand that she was not responsible for Thomas's death. He had given her permission to let go of the guilt, and in doing so had given her life back. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. always. They sat together as the sky turned gold and pink and purple, and Willa felt at peace in a way she never had before. The past was finally just the past, a place she had been but not where she lived anymore. The future stretched ahead full of possibility, and she was ready to walk into it without the weight of guilt dragging her down. Time moved forward as it always does. James grew tall and strong, joined eventually by a sister when Willa became pregnant again at 31. They named the girl Rose, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's steady gray eyes. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, named not for Willa's first husband but for Kade's father. The store grew into a successful business that provided well for the family. Kade eventually bought the building and the lot next to it, expanded into selling farm equipment and tools. They hired more help, became one of the larger employers in St. Louis. Willa managed the accounts and did the ordering while Kade handled the physical labor and customer relations. They built a new house on a piece of land overlooking the river, a big rambling place with room for the children to run, and a porch where Willa and Kade could sit together in the evenings. It was nothing fancy, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and partnership. James grew up to be a thoughtful young man, interested in books and learning. He went away to university in 1900, wrote letters home about his studies and the wider world beyond St. Louis. Rose was more interested in the store, had a head for numbers and a way with customers that reminded Kade of her mother. Young Thomas was still finding his way, interested in everything and nothing, full of enthusiasm and restless energy. Through it all, through the years of raising children and building a business and navigating the challenges every marriage faces, Willa and Kade remained deeply in love. They still made time for just the two of them, still talked for hours about everything under the sun, still reached for each other in the night. Willa sometimes thought about the woman she had been when Kade first walked into her store, so weighted down with guilt she could barely function. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. She was grateful for the journey that had brought her here but did not miss the pain. One evening in the summer of 1903, when Willa was 50 years old and Kade was 52, they took a walk down to the river like they had done countless times before. The children were grown or nearly so. The house was quiet, and it was just the two of them again like in the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked, her hand in his. Marrying a widow with so much baggage, Kade stopped walking, turned to face her. Even after more than 20 years of marriage, he still made her heart race. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa. You and the life we built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are." She kissed him there by the river with the sunset painting the water gold, and thought about how far they had come. How Kade had walked into her store and seen past the grief and guilt to the woman underneath, had loved her enough to help her find her way out of the darkness. He had helped her set down the burden she had carried for so long, had shown her she could walk free. And in doing so, he had given her everything she had never known to hope for, love and family and peace and joy. "Thank you," she said against his lips. "For what?" "For saving me." "We saved each other," Kade corrected. "That is what love does." They walked back to the house hand in hand as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside, the lights were warm and welcoming, and Willa could hear Rose practicing piano, the notes floating out through the open windows. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had built on the ruins of her past. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as years do. James married a teacher from the university and settled in Kansas City, gave them 3 grandchildren. Rose took over running the store when Willa's eyesight began to fail, proved to be even better at business than her parents. Thomas traveled for a while before coming home to St. Louis, married a local girl, and started a lumber business. Willa and Kade grew old together, their hair going gray and then white, their steps slowing but their love never diminishing. They sold the store to Rose when Kade's back got too bad for heavy lifting, but they stayed involved, coming by most days to help where they could and visit with the customers who had become friends over the decades. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The house was full of children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and love. Willa looked around the table at the faces of her family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After dinner, Kade took her hand and led her out to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. The summer night was warm and full of fireflies, the river a dark ribbon in the distance. 40 years, he said, pulling her close. Best 40 years of my life. Mine too. Willa rested her head on his shoulder, marveling at how perfectly they still fit together. Do you remember that first day when you came into the store? Of course. You looked so sad, so lost. I wanted to help you but did not know how. You did help me. You helped me see that I did not have to carry the guilt forever, that I could forgive myself and move forward. You did the hard work, Willa. I just walked beside you. You did more than that. You loved me when I did not love myself. You saw good in me when I could only see the bad. You gave me a reason to heal. Kade turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Even at 74 years old, even with the wear of age on his features, he was still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. You gave me just as much, he said. A home, a family, a purpose. Before I met you, I was just drifting, working one ranch after another with no real direction. You gave me something to build toward, someone to build it with. They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held 40 years of love and partnership and devotion. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano and voices joined in song, their family celebrating the love that had created them all. I would not change a single thing, Willa said. Not even the hard parts at the beginning. They brought us here to this. To this, Kade agreed, holding her close as the music drifted out into the summer night. They stood together on the porch they had shared for so many years, watching the fireflies dance and listening to their family sing, and Willa felt the peace that had eluded her for so long. The guilt that had once threatened to destroy her was gone, transformed through love and forgiveness into wisdom and compassion. She thought about the woman she had been, the widow who had believed she was irredeemable, and wanted to tell her that redemption was possible. That love could heal even the deepest wounds, that it was never too late to start again. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger and wiser and infinitely more at peace. Willa Vickers, beloved wife and mother and grandmother, had walked out of the shadow of guilt into the light of grace. And she had not done it alone. Kade had been there every step of the way, the cowboy who had seen her pain and offered his hand, who had loved her through the healing and beyond. He had helped her set down the burden that was breaking her, had shown her how to walk free. And walk free she did, for the rest of her long and happy life. The seasons turned, and the years flowed by like the river below their house. Willa and Kade grew old together in the way of couples who are truly devoted, their lives so intertwined that it became hard to say where one ended and the other began. They were partners in every sense, facing life's challenges together and celebrating its joys as one. In 1925, when Willa was 72, she woke one morning to find Kade had not risen with the sun as was his custom. She turned to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it took her breath away. "What is it?" she asked, reaching to touch his face. "Just memorizing this," he said. "You, here beside me, I want to remember it forever." "We have forever," she said, but even as the words left her mouth she knew they were not true. They had been blessed with long lives and good health, but no one lived forever. "However long we have, it will never be enough," Kade said, pulling her into his arms. "I could have 1,000 years with you and still want more." They lay together in the early morning light, and Willa felt tears slip down her temples into her hair. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude so profound it overflowed. This man had loved her without reservation for more than 40 years, had never wavered, had never made her feel like she was too much or not enough. "I love you," she whispered. "More than I have words to say. I know. I have always known." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And I love you just as much." They spent that day together doing ordinary things made precious by awareness of how fleeting time was. They walked in the garden Willa had planted years ago, now mature and lush. They sat on the porch and watched the river. They looked through old photographs, remembering the lives they had lived and the people they had been. That evening, Rose came by with her husband and children, and they all had dinner together. Willa watched Kade with their grandchildren, still patient and kind, still fully present. He had been such a good father, such a wonderful grandfather. The legacy of his love would live on in all the lives he had touched. After everyone left and the house was quiet again, Willa and Kade sat together in the gathering darkness, not bothering to light the lamps. The night was soft and warm, full of cricket song and the scent of roses from the garden. "No regrets?" Kade asked, a question he had posed many times over the years. "Not a single one," Willa answered, as she always did. "You? Only that we did not meet sooner, that we could not have more time. We have had a lifetime together, more than many people ever get. I know. I am grateful for every moment." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, two old people who had loved each other well. Willa thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first meeting in the store when she had been drowning in guilt to this moment of perfect peace. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. Kade lived 6 more months, dying peacefully in his sleep one autumn night with Willa beside him. She woke to find him gone, his face serene, his hand still warm in hers. The grief was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, but underneath it was gratitude. Gratitude that he had not suffered, that their last words to each other had been, "I love you," that they had been given so many beautiful years together. The funeral was well attended, nearly everyone in St. Louis coming to pay respects to a man who had been kind and fair and generous throughout his life. Willa stood by his grave and remembered another funeral, another grief, and marveled at the difference. When Thomas died, she had been consumed by guilt, unable to truly mourn because of what she believed she had done. But Kade's death, while devastating, carried no such burden. They had loved each other well, had built a good life together, had said everything that needed saying. There was sorrow but no regret. The days after the funeral were hard. The house felt too empty, too quiet. Willa moved through the rooms, seeing Kade everywhere, in the chair he favored, at the kitchen table, in their bed. But she was not alone in her grief. Her children rallied around her, making sure she ate and slept and had company. The grandchildren came to visit, bringing noise and life back into the silent house. Slowly, Willa found her way to a new normal. She could not say she adjusted to life without Kade, because that suggested she stopped missing him, and she never did. But she learned to carry the missing without being crushed by it, learned to find joy again in small things, even as a part of her heart remained forever with her husband. She lived 4 more years, dying at the age of 77 in the spring of 1930. Her children were with her at the end, holding her hands and telling her it was all right to go, that Kade was waiting for her. Willa smiled at that, closed her eyes, and slipped away as gently as falling asleep. They buried her beside Kade under an oak tree overlooking the river, her name carved beside his on the headstone. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around the grave, a testament to the love that had created them all. The preacher spoke about faith and eternal life, about Willa's kindness and strength. But Rose, when it was her turn to speak, told a different story. She told about how her mother had been broken when her father found her, weighted down with guilt and grief. About how Kade had loved her back to wholeness, had helped her see that she deserved happiness. About the love story that had transformed not just 2 lives but generations. "My mother taught me that it is never too late to start again," Rose said, tears streaming down her face. "That the past does not have to define the future. That love can heal even the deepest wounds. She and my father showed me what a good marriage looks like, what true partnership means, and I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life." After the funeral, the family gathered at the house one last time before it was sold. They walked through the rooms, remembering and telling stories, laughing and crying in equal measure. The house had been filled with love for so long, its walls soaked in happiness. It would be hard for another family to live up to that legacy, but they would try. James found a wooden box in his mother's bedroom, the one Kade had carved for her all those years ago. Inside were treasures, letters from Kade, photographs, pressed flowers, small mementos of a life well lived. At the bottom was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, covered in Willa's handwriting. He opened it and read aloud to his siblings. "I was lost in darkness, drowning in guilt, believing I was beyond redemption. Then Kade walked into my store and saw me, truly saw me, not the grief or the mistakes but the woman underneath. He loved me when I could not love myself. He helped me understand that I was not responsible for Thomas's death, that I did not have to carry that burden forever. He showed me I could forgive myself, could choose to walk forward into light instead of remaining trapped in shadow. He saved my life in every way a person can be saved. And then he loved me, faithfully and completely, for more than 40 years. I am grateful for every moment we had together. If I have learned anything in this life, it is that love is the only thing that matters, the only thing that lasts. Love and forgiveness and grace. Kade gave me all of those things. I hope I gave them back to him. I hope our children and their children learn from our example and build their own lives on the foundation of love. That is the legacy I want to leave behind." The siblings stood in silence, holding that precious piece of paper, understanding for the first time the depth of what their parents had shared. It was not just a romance or a marriage, but a true partnership, a love that had redeemed and transformed and created something beautiful from something broken. They decided to keep the box, to pass it down through the generations along with the story of Willa and Kade, so that their descendants would know that love could triumph over guilt, that forgiveness was possible, that it was never too late to start again. The years rolled on, and the story became family legend, told and retold until the details were polished smooth by repetition. The widow who was consumed by guilt until the cowboy helped her set it down and walk free. The love story that transformed 2 lives and created a family legacy of compassion and grace. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the mistakes Willa had made or the guilt she had carried, but how she had overcome them, how love had healed her, how she had chosen, with Kade's help, to forgive herself and embrace life again. How 2 people had found each other in the midst of their own pain and built something beautiful together. Their descendants spread across the country, carrying with them the lessons learned from Willa and Kade. They built their own families on foundations of love and honesty and partnership. They faced their own challenges and made their own mistakes, but they remembered the story of the widow and the cowboy and believed that redemption was always possible. And in a small cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri, under an old oak tree, two graves rested side by side. The headstone was weathered now, the names worn by wind and rain and time, but still legible. Kade Vickers and Willa Vickers, together in life and in death. Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents. Their bodies returned to the earth, but their love immortal, passed down through generations as proof that darkness can be overcome, that guilt can be released, that broken people can heal and love again. That was their legacy, and it endured.